Welcome to the Always Better Than Yesterday podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Hartley. This podcast exists to equip and inspire your heart-centered leadership. Every week, we bring interviews with some of the greatest heart sets and mindsets on the planet. I hope the heartprint of our time spent together is that it creates new possibilities for you and all those you come into contact with. If you'd like to explore what we could make possible for you, then head to abty.co.uk/connect and book in a free 30-minute call to begin our journey together. I just want to express a huge amount of gratitude to our sponsors, Map Media Online, an independent agency who specialise in content marketing, helping businesses get their message seen by the right audience. Matt has produced all the digital media assets for this podcast since episode 106 back in December 2020. To have Matt in your corner, head to mapmedia.online. I'd also like to thank Exhale Coffee. I have been a big fan of Exhale Coffee since meeting Alex and the team back in 2022. Exhale is the first coffee to be sourced, roasted and lab tested specifically to maximize its antioxidant and anti-inflammatory potency. An independent lab test has shown that 1 cup of Exhale coffee has the same antioxidant power as 1.8 kilos of blueberries or 55 oranges. I'm a huge fan, and Mrs. H loves the decaf, especially because she knows that Exhale use the mountain water decaffeination process, which uses only pure glacial water from the highest mountain in Mexico and no nasty chemicals. Simply head to exhalecoffee.com/ABTY for your special offer. And lastly, before I introduce this week's guest, please do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It would really help us leave a greater heartprint on this world. On episode 244, I am joined by Nicole Vignola. Nicole is a neuroscientist, a corporate consultant, author, and speaker. She's committed to making neuroscience tangible for the masses. Her first book, Rewire, The Neuroscience of a Good Life, is due for release early 2024. I hope you enjoy this conversation. You get some early insights into that book that is due out next year. Make sure you go pre-order your copy. And here we go. Here's episode 244 with Nicole Vignola. Nicole, welcome to the Always Better Than Yesterday podcast. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
Very well. Congratulations on finishing your book. I
Thank
can
you.
only imagine what that felt like to have I've seen a picture of you. You've got a copy of it. Like, what were the emotions when you had that physical copy?
Well, I must say we're still going through a major editorial process. So that was a dummy to check out that we like the cover and we like the finishes. So still a little bit in it, if I'm honest. But yeah, weird. I mean, it's a big topic that I talk about in my book. Actually, it's like emotional come downs,
Right.
because you get it from like post-Olympic depression,
Yeah.
and the major highs of like writing a book. And I had this moment earlier in the summer where I went into Penguin, and I walked in through the doors and I was like, hi, I'm here to see my editor. And I was like, oh my God, like real movie scene moment, right?
Yeah.
And I came home the week after and I felt really like down, really kind of like depressed, irritable, agitated. And that's when it occurred to me, it's like, we need to talk about these things, because sometimes we don't really realize the neurochemicals that are involved in such a high. And then, obviously, what goes up must come down, and I really crashed. So, and I think I want people to understand that, because sometimes, you have these thoughts and feelings, but they're not necessarily like a true representation of you and your state. They just kind of like, a rebalancing, if you will. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I'd love to dive into some of the neurochemistry, because I ran an event last year to celebrate our 5-year anniversary of being a company, had some speakers,
Yeah.
and the days after that event, I was like, never again. I'm not doing that again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just the come
Yeah.
down, and whether it was a dopamine come down or what, but it was, and I guess I talk a lot here around the kind of the Eastern philosophy of not being too attached to things, your attachment being the basis of suffering, and it no matter how you try not to get attached to any of these or fixate on outcomes or fixate on results, like there's always that crash and that come down. I guess, what in your understanding is the going on inside us then when that happens?
Yeah, actually, I did a post on this and it kind of went viral. So basically, dopamine is high in pursuit of your goals. And
Right.
when you reach your goals, it tends to drop.
Yeah.
Now, dopamine spikes when there's an unexpected reward. So I just want people to understand that there's a difference there. Expected reward, the dopamine is high before, drops down when you receive the reward, and then unexpected reward, it spikes at the reward, because that's how we learn. We learn that something is good, let's do that again. Or if if something's bad, dopamine will drop substantially lower, and you go, okay, I shouldn't have done that, don't do that again. Okay, that's the basis of learning as humans. But so through expected reward, putting an event or doing something, a goal, dopamine is really high in pursuit of getting to that reward. So what tends to happen then is that drop doesn't necessarily mean you have to feel low. I did a post and people were kind of confused because they were like, oh, well, is it inevitable? But I think, what we need to understand is that there are other neurochemicals at play. And there's no like one neurochemical does this and does that. We've come to understand as neuroscientists that there's a lot of interplay between sort of cocktails of neurochemicals. But I think it's I can't remember the author. God, I'll have to find it and so you can quote him. But he talks about how there's the here and now neurochemicals. So those are more like serotonin, oxytocin, the kind of ones that are responsible for you feeling happy in that moment. So when you reach your goals, it's about being grateful in that moment, in that space of actually I've just achieved this, not like, okay, what's next? Because that's the natural course order of things, right? You're like, okay, what now? I don't feel that good. That was rubbish. Like maybe I should do something else. But it's more like honing in on that space in that moment, like, aha, I've just experienced this. It feels great. I'm a bit sad now that it's over. But just really carving out that moment of like, taking a breather and living in the present, really.
I've been a nerd of psychology since I was a teenager, so I think I watched one too many crime documentaries.
Okay.
So I love the field of psychology, and I went into more of the criminal side of things. I had a career within the UK Police Service for a short while. But what's got you hooked? What got you fascinated with this neuroscience field?
Well, yeah, a lot of things. I mean, I remember for as long as I can remember, I was fascinated with the brain. That's probably because my father had schizophrenia, and my stepfather was an alcoholic. So weirdly, I felt this kind of like urge to understand rather than to like resent or be upset. Obviously, there were moments of my life where I have been, but so it's kind of like always a deep fascination for like why we behave in the particular ways that we do. And my neighbor was a doctor. I actually wanted to be a doctor. I applied to medical school 3 times, so that was 11 applications, 11 rejections. For anyone who's listening and is like, God, damn, I've been rejected so many times in my life. I've been rejected from medical. I actually got rejected from medical school 11 times, and then the subsequent year I got rejected again, and I hadn't even applied. And they emailed me saying, we're so sorry. Yeah, I know.
Just in case you thought you were going to apply, here's a no anyway.
I know, they were like, we're so sorry, your application got pulled into this year's one, and we just rejected you again. And I was like, oh my God, thank you. Thank you. I get it, you don't want me to be a doctor. But I applied to neuroscience as well, and yeah, like loved it completely. Just really, really enjoyed it. So, well, I lie actually, I didn't in the beginning. I was kind of like, this is really hard because you're studying things on a nanometer scale and you can't like extrapolate them into real life. And that's when I went on to do my master's, where I kind of merged psychology in organizations, especially, and individuals, right? Like how we operate on a day-to-day level, how we can attach this neuroscience that we learn in the labs and learn, in studies. So yeah, it's been a roller coaster of emotions. I actually had like a bit of a meltdown when graduating a few years ago. I can't remember when it was. It was like 2021, I think. Where I kind of felt like I'd wasted all my money and time on a neuroscience degree that I was never going to use. And I had like this like existential crisis because I was really like 30 at the time. So yeah.
Hey friends, before we dive back into the interview, I just wanted to take a quick moment and ask for your help. Did you know that only 7% of you, 7% are currently subscribed to the YouTube channel? If you are enjoying the content so far and haven't hit the subscribe button yet, now is the perfect time to do it. By subscribing, you'll stay up to date with all our latest videos and you'll become part of our fantastic community. Plus, it's entirely free and it takes just a second. Just click that red subscribe button below this video. Not only will you never miss out on our future content, but you'll also be showing your support for this channel and helping us grow. It's your way of saying, hey, I love what you're doing and I want to see more. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you'll be the first to know when we upload a new video. So if you're one of the 93% who hasn't subscribed yet, join the 7% who already have. And let's make this community even more awesome together. Thank you for being here. Let's get back to that interview. Yeah, a third life crisis. But
Yeah.
it's so the title of your book is called Rewire, and I know that's like a tip of the hat to like this idea of rewiring and
Yeah.
neuroplasticity. But I wonder whether there's a reason why we need to rewire. I wonder whether there are certain things,
Mm.
particularly within culture, whether there's particularly things within our system, maybe our upbringing, maybe in our organizations that are just failing us.
That's exactly why it's Rewire, because so the book has this premise that, we've been given these narratives by our peers, our parents, the people before us, the people around us, our cultures, like where we grew up, but they shape everything that we believe as a child and as a young adult. And then we go into the real world and we've like now been programmed by somebody else, but then we go off on this trajectory that follows on from that, but that may not necessarily be who you want to be. So parents would tell their kids, you're the sporty one, you're creative, you couldn't do this, you couldn't do that. I had a teacher who kind of giggled at me when I said I wanted to be a doctor. I'd probably write a letter. Um, like I made it now.
Yeah.
That's probably the reason I'm here.
Yeah.
But some people aren't lucky enough to have that. Kind of like I'll show you. They might go down that route. Now I know I've worked with so many people that kind of like. I remember having this client who was her mother told her she wasn't a good student. So she was always really afraid of, even when she started coaching with me, she was kind of terrified that there was going to be like kind of exam where I was going to test her. And I was like, no, 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 like there's none of that. Um, and it's funny because she just never she was happy with her life. Don't get me wrong. She was a housewife and she was really happy with it. But she'd always wished she'd done something with her career. But she was always terrified of studying and just putting herself out there because of her mother berating her whole life.
Mm. Yeah, it
Yeah,
just seems to be like there's this interplay, this I think therefore I am type philosophy, which is like
yeah,
I believe something about myself, therefore it self perpetuates, almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, like I
yeah,
am that. And
yeah.
I think we seem to, I think James Clear in his book Atomic Habits talked about how we show up in line with who we believe ourselves to be in terms of
Mm-hmm.
our identity. And I guess
Yeah.
what you're saying is that can either work for us or against us, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, there's a huge section of that in my book. I sort of speak about it in various ways, but yeah, one of the ways is that your beliefs do trickle down into your every being, right? So the way you then conduct yourself in the world and the way that you then think, your emotions, your behaviors, they all, the cognitive triangle kind of explains then what you think directs your behaviors, and your behaviors direct your emotions, and your emotions, they all kind of like direct each other, which I find really crazy because then there's like I add another layer to that. And okay, so I've given the coffee shop example where you walk into a coffee shop, you're self-conscious, you walk in, your body language is closed, you're kind of like
Yeah.
shy, you don't really want to like ask for this coffee. So the barista kind of barista. I'm Italian, but he picks up on the body language, or they pick up on the body language. So then you think that actually they sort of validating how you feel because now they're acting weird, but they're actually just trying to give you space. So
Yeah.
there's this like interaction where you like then start believing what you're seeing because you interpret it with your cognitive bias of how it should be. So this person's not looking at you because you're ugly. Well, actually, they're not looking
Yeah,
at you
yeah,
because they
yeah.
want to try and be like courteous of your energy, for lack of a better term. And it's just yeah, it's this whole thing where we then go through life trying to validate the beliefs that we have. So you'll go through life trying to prove that what you believe is right. So the barrister looked at me funny. I am weird. This person doesn't want to talk to me. I am, this, and it's yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, I think some of the I think most well-known practices around mindset have been, start to learn to observe your thoughts. You are not your mind, you have a mind, start to learn to observe. the title of your book is about Rewire, your neuro toolkit for everyday life. What are some of the tools then that we can, in that situation, what are the things that maybe someone could learn to observe in themselves, say, talk to themselves? I think, replace the thinking with maybe something that they speak to themselves. What are some of the suggestions you might have for someone to rewire in that situation?
Yeah, so I give a couple of things. In that particular example, I think, I've given a couple of tools, but one of the things I like to always say to people is like fact or fiction, So
Yeah,
what you believe,
yeah.
is it fact? Is it fiction? If it's
Mm,
fact, can you change it? Because most of the time you can. If it's fiction, then it's just a story that you're telling yourself that may not necessarily be true you know and I've even just observing these narratives, so even just being able to name them, so acknowledging, okay, I have this belief that this is
mm,
who I am. Even just doing that activates areas of the brain that are more logical, so the frontal cortex, because now you're attaching kind of thought and reason to these beliefs, so you can start to analyze them with a more logical mind state. you know that's more of like an immediate tool in the moment.
yeah.
Your body language, if you stand up tall, you're going to be more confident. You're going to
Yeah.
feel like, okay, actually I feel better, rather than kind of like being closed in. So
Mm,
another tool is literally just kind of like opening yourself up. And then there's obviously like more tools that work around that, things like
mm,
journaling. Again, there's so much research around it, because one of the things that happens, and this is one of the things I really want to convey, is that when we have these thoughts in our minds, there's no coherent beginning and end, right?
mhm.
They're just kind of like words that float around in our minds, and we've seen it in PET scans that they essentially take up more space in the brain. So an area called the default mode network, which is an area of networks in the brain. But when we have to generate words, or when we have to speak words, or when we have to think about words through writing them, we're recruiting very small parts of our brain, different areas. So like if you're speaking with
Mm,
the Broca's area in the left temporal lobe, if it was generating thoughts or words for writing, it'll be more like the frontal cortex. If you're
mm,
reading words, it's more the visual cortex. So now you're activating different parts that switch
mm,
off that default mode network, that ruminates on that kind of like automaticity of
mm,
no beginning and no end. And it's
mm.
a classic thing of, have you ever tried to write down your feelings and thoughts, and as soon as you try to write it down, you're like, oh, actually, I don't know how to get this out, because it's a different
Mm,
network
mm, mm,
that's operating in your brain. And when you can start to do that, you start attaching more reason to it. So that's why journaling really works. We
mm,
start to kind of observe them from a more logical standpoint and realize that actually what we're saying and doing is may not necessarily be true.
mm. Yeah, I think what I've understood that is about trying to do activities that bridge left brain, right brain.
Yes. So left brain, right. What do you mean by that?
So in terms of storytelling helps me connect both the logic and the feeling. I think what I've understood in the past is that my ability to find words is in a different part of my brain to where I'm feeling it.
Somewhat, yes.
Hmm.
But what I don't want people to confuse is that we've debunked the left brain, right brain myth, in the sense that left brain is more logic and right brain's more creative. So,
Hmm.
people sort of used to believe that they were more right brain because they were more creative and they use more of that side. So that's not necessarily true. So like the left side of the brain helps to communicate words, but then the right side of the brain helps to attach comprehension and
Mm,
understanding to it, like context.
mm,
So they both work in unison to essentially
mm,
generate a conversation. But yeah, there are differences for sure.
mm.
But in some people it can be flipped as well, I believe. So if you're left-handed,
Yeah.
there are some instances where people have actually the right side of the brain that is more for words, and the left side that's more
That's
for
fascinating.
comprehension.
My
So
son's
yeah.
left-handed.
Interesting. Just put them in a scan.
Yeah.
I don't know. I
Right.
don't even know how you
Off you
begin
come.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take my
I just
10-year-old.
want to check something
Yeah,
for my
Nicole
own
said.
curiosity.
One of the things you said a minute ago was about the prefrontal cortex, and I know that that's the source of the brain which helps us almost like our human computer logic rational type.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes the production of cortisol inhibits our access to that. Is that right? Is it the
That's
stress chemical? There are many things, maybe that coffee situation, maybe within parenting, maybe within a leadership hierarchy, high
Yeah,
pressure sports situation. There are many, many environments we're going to be in that are going to arouse our states. Maybe,
absolutely.
the production of cortisol is going to be flowing,
Yeah,
means that we are less able to tap into. How do we regain access so that we may be choosing
yeah.
our response rather than our chimp ruling the
Yeah, that again, so that was the other layer I wanted to add on is that, when we are more emotional, if you will, for lack of a better term, we're activating more limbic states of our brain. So more kind of like, I use the word primitive, but I don't want people to think that they're two different systems that don't work together. Again, so there's a big interplay between all brain networks in the brain,
Mm.
but it's more primitive in the sense that it's more less logical, more emotional, ready to run, not listen. So I always say that, if you were in a stressful state and there was a lion, you wouldn't reason with yourself, you just run. Your brain's not designed to listen, to reason. So, if we extrapolate that into like every other scenario, so again, stress of the brain is stress. It doesn't differentiate between, okay, lion, divorce, it's stress, right? It's cortisol, it's a neurochemical. So, being able to regulate our central nervous system back down into a state that activates more logical brain states. So, Dr. Huberman talks about the physiological side all the time, and that's one of the tools that I give is being able to just take that moment to kind of like reactivate logical centers, right? So double inhale
Okay.
and a long exhale. Quickest way to get your central nervous system back down into a parasympathetic state.
Mm.
Once you've done that, then taking some space, like going for a walk or again writing it down, just giving you that opportunity to really think about this from a more logical standpoint rather than just automatic reaction of what comes out. Because if you've been practicing reaction over and over again in your life, it's going to take a different route to essentially rewire that into something that's more responsive rather than
Yeah.
reactive.
I think, yeah, I love that. And I think one of the things that is the downside of some of our world that we're in is that it gets very individualized. It's almost like,
Mm,
what's going on in my brain? What is my, self-development type stuff, right?
yeah,
And actually, I love the words that Johan Hari used in his book Lost Connections. He said, sometimes it's not about what's going on inside our head, but sometimes it's what is our head inside. And it's that
mm,
kind of ode to the environment that we place ourselves in is sometimes not conducive to the human heart, mind, body,
yeah,
so like when you said about going for a walk, sometimes it's about expanding the horizon. Maybe I'm looking at maybe I'm subjecting my mind and my body to sitting still for too long, stressful environments,
yeah.
social media, like, and
That's Yeah, and that's one of the things that I really want people to understand. We're so influenced by external stimuluses all the time. Like you're stressed, you go on your phone. So now you're getting subliminally hinted by someone else's perspective on social media. But really, like, how often do you check in with yourself? How are you doing? Hey, Nick, let's go for a walk and just be alone. No, no distractions, just going into your mind. And the thing is, people are afraid of that. They don't want to sit with their own thoughts, right? People don't want to meditate. They don't want to go for a walk because they have to then think about the thoughts that are perpetuating in their heads. And there might be rumination thought, like ruminative thoughts, negative thoughts. But the thing is, you have to kind of like go through it to get onto the other side. You have to kind of like sit with them, sift them, deal with them, and then, come out a different person. And I really find that walking is one of the best ways to do that because when we walk, our eyes are moving side to side. So that lateral eye movement activates areas of the frontal cortex, which then deactivate the amygdala.
Mm.
So you can think about your feelings and emotions without that sort of fear perception attached. So the emotional friction or the emotional load that's attached to these thoughts gets diminished. So,
Mm.
you come back from walking, you're like, wow, I don't regret that. Whoever regrets going for a walk?
Yeah, there's. I love that the relation to the eyes and the threat perception, because isn't there some research that says about whether we are something our focus, whether it's specific or whether it's peripheral, like that can indicate where we are within our stress response.
Yeah, so I know that Huberman talks about this a lot, but basically, like when your eyes converge, they release norepinephrine in response to that pupillary convergence. Because, if you wanted to pick something up with precision, you wouldn't be looking somewhere else, or you wouldn't be expanding your periphery to try to pick it up. You'd need that precision, so you'd look at it. So there's a big area of research around pupillary convergence and then divergence as well, where the pupils constrict and dilate in response to light. That's still very new research. I haven't gone down a more updated look on that. It was something I was trying to talk about in my book, but I feel like I need to speak to someone who is maybe like an ophthalmologist who knows a bit more, because I don't want to make bold claims that I can't,
Yeah,
you know.
and I wasn't just about to make a bold claim, but more just a hypothesis, which is just that
No,
interesting
but
idea of actually, if you are someone that is used to scanning for threats and perception, maybe because your safety has required it, then
yeah.
working in an open plan office,
Mm,
whether you're in a kids kids in classrooms, that kind of maybe that ADHD kind of symptom response where you're
yeah.
always I don't know, like
Yeah, no, and actually you're right. And there was a piece of research that I remember reading that was saying that, when we have our periphery in front of us and we can scan that there's no immediate threat, we tend to lower our stress response. And I believe that people's stress is higher in cities as well, rather than in
yeah,
nature. And predominantly, if you're sitting, actually, I remember reading this piece of research, and I can't remember the author off the top of my head, but if you're sort of looking out onto the distance, but your back is covered, that tends to have a big interplay in how your stress levels play
so
in
it
the
reduces
environment.
it if your back's safe.
Yeah, if your back is safe, but you can
Yeah.
see like no immediate threat in front of you, there's something very primal about that that tells your brain, you're
Interesting.
okay.
That's
Yeah.
interesting, isn't it? Because I often think about primitive times, not all the time, but when we would be sat around a campfire, right? The fire would have been the TV, and then that phrase, "I've got your back." The
Yeah.
power of community. It's we sit in a
Mm,
circle so that each of us has each other's back.
yeah, I like that. I like that a lot.
Mm. I
Mm,
not to be too controversial, nor am I a neuroscientist, but I wonder the relationship between the increase in what it would seem of neurodiversity
yeah.
and actually whether a lot of that is hidden in neuroplasticity. I wonder whether our culture is hiding behind a label of neurodiversity when actually the environments that we've subjected our brains to has actually created some neuroplastic effects. What do you
Um, I know the brain that changes itself. Norman Deutsch, he talks a little bit about this, and he basically says that children who are exposed to TV at a very young age are more likely to develop symptoms of ADHD.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of research to show that neuroplasticity can help with ADHD. So, kind of like changing our state of focus. There was a wonderful research where they did open monitoring or open gaze meditation. And they
Mm.
did 17 minutes of this with individuals with ADHD, clinically diagnosed ADHD. And in that 17-minute one sitting of meditation, they'd already changed their plasticity to help them with symptoms, which is pretty wild.
Yeah.
So, I do believe that there's we can rehabilitate people who have had strokes to use their arms and limbs again.
Yeah, yeah,
We,
yeah.
the brain is going to try and maximize its at best possible. So, if you lose a sensory input, so like vision, you become more discriminative through tactile discrimination. So that's why a blind person can read braille, and that's why when I put my finger over braille, I'm like, what is going on? So
Yes.
it's that, like, the brain is going to maximize that area of the visual cortex that is no longer being used.
Mm.
So, cortical map, we call it sort of like cortical real estate, cortical maps. They're going to try and be as maximized as possible. So, I do believe that we can pretty much rewire, a lot of things in our
Yeah.
brains anyway. So yeah, it's an interesting notion. I can't say, it's a very controversial topic, but I do agree that I think also what's happening is we're sort of asking, let's use children as an example. We're asking children to fit in a system that's not necessarily made for how
Yes.
we should be operating. We're asking squares to fit into a circle.
Yes.
and then when we're condemning them and putting a label on them, you've got ADHD because you can't
Yeah,
concentrate.
some kids work out how to get ahead in that system, and some kids are just like, this isn't. And without putting too much label on, that's my son and my daughter. My son has
Yeah,
learned how to master the system,
yeah,
loves
good for
getting
him.
grades, whereas my daughter would she doesn't like to do what she doesn't want to do. She's very
Yeah.
creative. She's very artistic. She's
Mm,
very expressive. And
yeah.
it's yeah. So her feedback from a teacher was, well, you're gonna have to learn how to just do what's needed
Yeah,
at
but
8 years old.
to some extent you can try, you in life there's a lesson
Yeah,
there. We've got to do
yeah,
the things you don't want to do. But that's one of the, I think for people who have ADHD, it's actually just amplifying what I think we all really believe is that we only want to do the things we care about. And that's like classic etiology of an ADHD person. They will hyper focus on the
hyper
things that they
focus.
really care about.
Yeah,
And I've had clients that have to like put a timer on because they'll forget to eat, they'll forget to drink because they get so deeply engrossed in their work. But then you ask them to do anything else,
yeah,
laundry, mundane events that have to be done for
yeah.
everyday living.
So it's not a
And
deficit. It's just they don't give
no,
a shit.
exactly. That's exactly it. And I think I believe that these neurodiversities are more like superpowers in a way because you look at people with ASD, autism spectrum disorder, they generally have a very high functioning side of things depending on where they are on the spectrum, right? So there are deficits in other areas of life, like maybe the ones where society's asking them to, be, and I put normal in brackets, like
Yes. Yep.
do your washing, do this, do that, show up to work, greet people.
Mm.
you
And
know?
I think you're right. I think you just used the word normal as I think Gabor Mate wrote a book on the myth of normal. Like,
Yeah,
I think that's half the issue, isn't it? Because
it's
I
like,
I remember I think it's like Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers or something like that, but basically said whatever we go in terms of the average human, there is
mm,
no one that is literally on
no,
the average.
no.
It's a
And
distribution
that's
curve.
And that's exactly it. Is I just don't think that anyone's normal.
Right. Yeah.
We all have our own little quirks, and I think individuals with neurodivergencies
Yes.
have like superpowers in a way. Like I said, now with my client who's got ADHD, she's a really successful business owner
Mhm.
who goes so deep that she has to like put a timer on her phone because she forgets to eat. I mean, that's like some real dedication there.
Yeah. It's like,
I'm like
yeah.
food all the way.
But it's like, yeah, right. But it's like purely present, isn't it? It's purely present, engaging, and for me, it's like that. Normal is a narrative. You used the
Yeah,
word earlier, narrative. The opposite is, for me, it's about coming to the world from the inside out as an expression of who we truly are. And I
yeah,
think if there are ways with which we can get to understand how our brain works, how our heart is wired, how the things that are important to us, the things that we care about, the stories we tell ourselves, then that enables us and gives us the freedom and permission to bring whatever this is to its fullest.
yeah. And I think my deepest underlying sort of belief is that I think we need to work with ourselves
Mhm.
without like if as long as you're not arguing with yourself, then I think you can be happy and do anything you want in life. As long as you're aligned with who you are,
Mm,
how you operate and what you want to be.
mhm.
And there's a big chapter in my book about like, keeping promises to ourselves because when you like quite literally nurture that relationship with yourself, then it doesn't matter if you've got ADHD and you operate in
Mm,
this way. It doesn't matter if you're like this and you operate in that way. As long as you are aligned with yourself, because if you're not aligned with yourself, what are you aligned with?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, and this is why people get lost in culture. This is why our
Yeah,
children get educated by TikTok. This
yeah,
is because they haven't got that anchor of,
yeah,
without being too political, I think school should be places and spaces where kids go and find out about who they truly are, not
yeah,
lose themselves in
yeah.
culture.
In a system that, yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the important things to kind of bring full center is because we've talked about neurodiversity, and I know that you talk about the brain being the hardware and the mind being the software, and I know that
Mhm.
there'll be people out there that have damage to the hardware which presents in situations. So I think it's just important probably put that in front and center. Talk to us
Yeah.
about hardware and software.
Yeah. So, and just to go back on that, I damage, yes, but it depends what we're talking about
Sure.
because I also believe that we have different sets of hardware that
Okay, cool.
maybe is like you've got a Windows and I've got a Mac. Neither's better than the other.
Oh, there
Just
is.
different.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, yeah,
I'm joking. I'm joking.
I'm like, which one? Tell me it's
Yeah.
Mac.
Well, I'm on
But
a Mac, so yeah, guess it's yours.
okay, okay, fine. Okay, well we can Samsung and no, Apple maybe, but anyway, basically, I think people just have different kinds of hardware. But yeah, so the premise is that, we need to take care of our hardware as much as our software. So people, bang on about mental health and software this, sorry, mental health this and behaviors, habits. But if we haven't got the basics in place, you're not sleeping right, you haven't got your
Yeah.
stress levels under control, you're not hydrating correctly. I mean, I don't know if you saw, I just drank a whole thing of electrolytes. That's what the brown water was, just in case you're wondering. Our brain communicates in the space of water through, sodium, potassium. So drinking effectively and consistently throughout the day can actually help in our processing speed, how we interpret our choices and decisions. So
Hmm.
and all these things need to be in place because it's very well saying, okay, actually, I have depression and I want to change that. But if you're not sleeping enough, which is, a problem in itself. And I do appreciate that people have problems with sleep when they have depression and other things. But it's going to be very hard to be at a place where you can feel like you can make a change. And it's the same respect as like, when you're in a dark place and you know that the answer is exercise, all the answers, but it's hard to get yourself out of that place because the hardware component is maybe not, operating effectively. So, making sure that we're getting the right things like sleep, meditation, taking regular, I mean, honestly, I think 90% of our problems will be solved if we just spend less time on our phones.
Right.
It's something I'm really trying to do at the moment. I'm reading a lot more. I read a book a week now.
Oh,
Like,
nice.
who would have thought I would read a book a week? But a
What do you
book
read?
takes
Is it education? Is it you're always on, always learning, or is
everything,
it?
everything, anything. I just read Matthew McConaughey's Green Lights. I read that in a day.
Oh
It was
man,
so good. I'm
Matthew
reading
was on the
about,
show a couple of years ago talking about
yeah.
Green Lights. Incredible book.
Okay,
Yeah,
wow. I need
incredible
I need
human.
to listen to the podcast. I love him. Love
Yeah.
him. And I'm reading Barbarian Days at the moment as well. Can't remember the author, but it's a really good one. So yeah, I toggle between, I've read Lost
Lost Connection.
Connections,
Oh, that's a great one.
Johan
The,
Hari.
the reason I ask is that every time I read, my wife's like, "Can you just stop learning for a second?" Like, because I can't,
Yeah.
I can't do the Harry Potters and the fiction. My brain doesn't allow me to revel in that. I'm like, oh, I enjoy learning about this stuff.
Yeah, I can do fiction. Just depends on what it is. I'm reading my agent's book at the moment, and that's quite a quirky, fun read.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a book takes about 8 to 10 hours to read, I believe, or maximum 12 if you're very slow, depending on the size of the book. That I can find 12 hours in a week to read. You don't have to read a book a week like me, but
It's interesting, isn't it? Because
six.
if we all went to our social media stats on our phone, you can
Yeah,
find those
yeah.
hours. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I was like, I need to be reading at night and I need to be reading in the morning. So that's what I've been doing. And that's like half an hour to an hour of reading a day. Like in 8 days, I can get through a book.
I don't know if
So
you know the research, and I certainly don't know it well enough to quote it, but isn't there something about when we read before bed, whether it's our eye movement or what, but it actually starts to change our brain frequencies, our brain waves to a more supple state, ready for sleep? Am
yeah,
I making that up?
well, I'm not entirely sure, but I've had this question before, but I think what goes back to is the same lateral eye movement that I was talking about when walking. It switches off the amygdala. It kind of like dampens that feeling of like anxiety, thoughts, worry that we normally get when we get into bed from the day's sort of events. So yeah, it also helps you wind down into more of like a theta state. So
Yeah.
you can, because this is the thing. So, we've got gamma, beta, alpha, theta, delta. Delta is your deepest wave sleep. When we're operating on our phones, we're in beta. If you're arguing with someone on Instagram, you're at gamma. So now you're here. You've got to go through gamma, beta,
Yeah.
alpha, theta to get into delta, right? So it's like, how can you expect to scroll on your phone and then fall asleep straight away and get a good night's rest? when you're that activated. So that's why something like reading can help you just really unwind without that stimulus, that kind of beta frequency that puts you in a state of alertness. Um, but back to the hardware, software, yeah, I think it's really important to just take care of both from a brain health perspective and do, what you can. Like there are days, and I'm not saying you need to like, do things you don't want to all the time, but I know that I definitely operate at my best when I do exercise every day, even if it's not a hard workout. I'm not saying like do a HIIT class every morning at 5. Go for a walk or go for a run or exercise. When I exercise regularly and I do my meditation straight after, I have like a whole routine, I'm a way better person. But I also know that when I'm not in that place, it's really hard for me to get them. Like, oh, I know I need to do it. I just
100%.
can't bring myself to do it. And that's when I'm like, Nike just hit the nail on the head, right? They were like, just do it.
Yeah, yeah, 100%.
Like, no ifs and buts about it. Just do it. And I
And
feel better.
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
But
yeah, no, no.
there are bits like that where I'm about to publicly declare it for the first time. I'm doing a half marathon in a couple of weeks' time. My
Yay!
identity is not a runner, right? I had a period. My nan passed away sadly a
I'm
couple of
sorry
months
to
ago.
hear.
Thank you. And I was just in a bit of a lull. I was like,
Yeah,
it came up on my story. I was like, oh, sod it. I'm just going to sign up. So I stupidly, in that moment,
that's normally how it
commit.
happens.
I committed to something and now so I look at my flipping running trainers. I'm like, I don't want to do this, and I don't want to do
Yeah,
this. And so there's that or sometimes I'll do like ice baths and it's always that moment when you're looking at it when the chatter just becomes
yeah,
louder, and it's learning how to go. Not today. Gonna crack on. Gonna do it anyway.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's it, right? It's like keeping those promises to yourself, like I said, doing regularly hard things. When we engage in things that challenge us, we actually change our physiology. So this is like circling back to that stress response of being at work and being triggered or whatever. When we do regular hard things, we actually change our central nervous system response to stress because you're voluntarily putting yourself in a stressful situation. So now you're saying, okay, well, actually, it takes me this much more to activate a stress response because I regularly stress my body out and my body's now adapting, right? So now the threshold is higher. So it takes a lot more to stress yourself out. And that's why hard things are important.
Yeah, and I think I've seen you quoted as saying your brain is plastic, not elastic. And
Yeah.
I wonder whether we can take this conversation into a kind of corporate space now, because a lot of corporates over the last few years, 5 years or so, have gone down the mental health route, but
Yeah.
the solution is not a breathwork class or a yoga session. Because I think that's an ode to your brain is plastic, not elastic. What does it mean? Why is it not elastic, and what are the consequences of believing so?
Well, I think a lot of people think that like if they take a day off, so they say they have like a good week and then they take one day off, they're just gonna like revert back to old habits. And don't get me wrong, it's very easy to do that. But I have clients that have been working for like a year, for example, and then they'll have like one bad day and they're like freaking out because they think that, they're just gonna like become that old person again. I put that in like inverted commas because I don't believe that there's any like old version of us, just an evolved version. But so, it's just as easy as we can create habits, um, they can stay. So we've still laid out that
Yeah,
cortical pathway for these new habits. So I think when we do that, people start seeing their progression in a different light because what tends to happen is like someone will do like progress a week, two, and then they kind of like get panicked about this thing
yeah,
and then they revert and they forget about everything they've done. But if you say actually those 2 weeks are still there somewhere,
yeah,
it gives people that like feeling of like, oh, actually I can do this instead of that daunting, oh my God, do I have to keep doing this
yeah.
forever or
It's
I'm
never
never going
back
to
to square
change.
zero, is it? Because you've stacked the bricks.
Yeah, exactly. The foundation is still there. So, yeah, I don't know if that helps your question, but
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I guess I'll be more specific in terms of now when it comes to um, the kind of business corporate setting. How do we make something such as neuroscience more accessible and understandable to? I guess what are the leadership implications for some of the things you talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I do a few talks on this, and I think one of the things that it's not really addressing your question, but it's continuity in organizations, right? Because I'll come in, I'll give the talk,
Yeah.
and then I always wonder, I'm like, how many of them still
Hmm.
remember? So, it would be great to implement more of like a program around changing. So that's why I also work as an organizational consultant. So I'll go into companies, I'll deliver the talks, I'll deliver the workshops, and then through continuity, we make sure that these structures are being implemented. And that's also why I work with like executives on a one-to-one, because I want to change how they lead people, you
Hmm.
know, because if you can be a good leader, your team will listen, your team will be more inclined to want to work, performance goes up, trust,
Yeah.
autonomy, all of these, lovely things that
Hmm.
that happen when, we are operating as a better human. So it's definitely something that I think we need to bridge more, because I appreciate that companies are trying to, implement these things and talk more about well-being, but they'll have a well-being day. And then it's like, okay, now what?
Yeah, tick that box, but it's the living embodiment, isn't it? And I think, one of the things that I love about this podcast is that we just try and equip leaders. We try
Yeah.
and equip them. So having this conversation hopefully sparks something within them to go, every human being that I am responsible for leading has a
Mm,
mind, has a
yeah.
body,
Yeah.
has a hardware and software, and it's learning. I guess first and foremost is, how am I maximizing my own? And then how
Mm,
do I learn how to maximize or create the environment to get the best
yeah.
out of others?
One of the things that I always like to teach my clients is that, you are the leader.
Yeah.
So, it's easy for like clients and me, I have a business that I run people, and it's easy sometimes to be like, oh, they should know this, or, XYZ. And I always remember, come back to this, like, no, you should just coach them through it. And it's the same, like I had a bit of an altercation on Friday night with some drink situation in a bar, and the guy was really hyped, really angry. I was like, I just want a refund. I want to go. I don't really want to be here. And he took it really personally. And I was like, look, it's not coming out of your paycheck. I understand you're super stressed. Like I've just seen the happy hour. It doesn't look fun for you. But I'm telling you, I'm not angry. It doesn't need to be a thing. Like, let's just take a breath. I just
Yeah.
want my refund. It's gonna come out of the company's like money anyway, not
Yeah.
yours. It's fine. And he was like, I could just see he was like, ha, because I think we need to guide people a lot of
Yes.
the times, and I try and do that in every situation.
Yeah.
I had a similar thing with an Airbnb host situation, and that kind of went pitong. But anyway, the first time I tried, it was again like just trying to help people to see a different perspective, because when we're in that state of high cortisol, I'm telling you, very few people can think logically, and very few people can actually take on this role of I'm going to help instead of amplify and make worse.
Yes.
It's a skill being able to diffuse and redirect. So
Yeah.
any leader that's listening to this and forgets that sometimes, like we all do, just remember that the people that are looking up to you, again, have their own hardware, they have their own software, they've got their own shit going on at home, they also slept 6 hours because their kid was up at night. There's
Yeah.
things going on. So it's our job as leaders to really just guide them through it and remind them that we can do things without blowing up. We can do things without getting super angry. There are tools involved, there is the help involved, and there's the guidance that allows us to get to that place where we can operate better on a day-to-day basis. I don't know if that helps, but
Yeah, 100% is that is the essence of leadership, isn't it? We can't control whatever comes our way, but we can try and get the best out of ourselves in the situations that we face.
yeah, exactly.
Mm.
Yeah.
One of the things that I saw you post recently is about unique brain styles, and it's understanding, particularly as teams. I come from a culture where there was a preferred leadership style, and mine was very
Hmm.
different, and therefore the narrative I had internally was, I haven't got what it takes to be a leader here.
Right.
Whereas if I was working in a leadership environment that was like, wow, you're different to me, and I like that you bring this particular style and attribute to a team.
Yeah.
What is it about the unique brain styles that could be useful for a leader to understand?
Yeah, I mean, so the brain styles was something that I did with Reverie, which is a great app, and I think everyone should be, give it a go at least. I think the only sort of flag to wave there is, people who have schizophrenia might not, benefit from it. So just definitely check with the physician. But self-hypnosis, and I'm sort of going off on a tangent now, but
Hmm.
self-hypnosis helps with, like visualizing stress, visualizing like different outcomes.
Mm.
And that's one of the things that I like to talk to people about because sometimes we, especially in the moment, if you haven't practiced a different outcome, I had a chat with someone on a podcast and they were saying like people ask him of things and he goes, yes, but he doesn't want to do them because he's so like busy all the time, but his automatic is like, I don't want to let people down.
100%.
So one of the
Yeah.
things that we got to do is we practice what could be an alternative solution, like a response to that. Because in that moment, it's called mental heuristics. They're basically shortcuts. Your brain is going to take shortcuts to try and maximize your efficiency. So you're going to say yes, even though you didn't mean it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so practicing an alternate response like, hey, I really want to, but I
Yeah, yeah,
can't
yeah.
right now,
Yeah.
means that you then are more likely to engage in that response when the situation arises because you're
Yeah.
prepared. So self hypnosis helps with a lot with that. It helps you like embody that feeling of like being in a different place. So what I mean by that is like, especially let's use like people who've suffered with, trauma, for example. It's you want to get over the trauma, but your
Mm.
body doesn't quite know how to feel in a space. And it's that classic feeling of like you come out of a toxic relationship, for example, but then no one really taught you what it was like to live in peace. Your body's got to recalibrate because the body doesn't know the difference between right and wrong. It just knows it's been repeated and
Mm.
what's familiar, even if what's familiar is morally incorrect, right? So that's what self hypnosis helps you with, is like visualizing where you could be or where you want to be.
Mm.
So back to your question about leaders is like, yeah, we all have different styles. And I think, if we can remember that, again, we all have little superpowers, regardless of our neurodivergencies, regardless of our little quirks. I don't believe that there's
Mm.
any normal, right? I think we can be normal in some respects on a spectrum, but I don't think
Yeah.
every part of us is normal on all spectrums.
Which, ironically, I think I'm a Oasis fan, and Noel Gallagher wrote a lyric that just says "True perfection has to be imperfect," which
Yeah.
for me is that actual normal is probably abnormal.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I think, if anything, it's probably something, we could go down another route and say that, being normal is probably wrong in itself because that could like perpetuate feelings of perfectionism.
Sure.
Is that normal, So yeah, there's so many layers to this, but
Well, I think that anyone that aspires to be normal actually dulls down the fullest of their expression, whatever unique expression that was meant to be. It's interesting you
yeah,
said the word trauma because sometimes that yes response is that whatever they needed to do as a young person or whatever to preserve a relationship, to feel safe, to feel loved. And I
yeah,
remember reading Will Smith's book and how he talked about how a lot of his humor came from the abuse of a father. Actually,
right.
if his dad was laughing at him, he wasn't getting smacked by his dad. So it was that kind of,
Wow.
even a great skill and a strength that was born from that was actually rooted in a trauma response. So
Mm,
I guess that's where it's really powerful with your book. And the first step is break the cycle, learning to observe. I guess that makes compassion possible, right? Being able to
yeah.
see ourselves in a different light. And I think wonderful things made possible by compassion.
Yeah. Yeah, and understanding why our brain operates the way it does. The people
Yeah.
berate themselves, but they don't understand that actually it's a programming that's been, curated by, someone like Will Smith's dad, for example. Sorry, the cat. Just gonna take that down before he rips our computer down.
Yeah.
Um, he's a Maine Coon, it's my friend's cat, so he's massive. He's so sweet. I'll show you in a minute. Um, but yeah, so it's about just understanding
Yeah.
why we behave the way we do, and people start to kind of see it from a different perspective and go, oh, okay, actually from a hardware component I can see how I got to this point.
Mm.
And it takes that kind of like load off, but people believe that there's something wrong with them or that the emphasis is on them. I should be here because XYZ, but actually I'm here because of whatever. And it's very vague, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, this is going to speak to the people that need to hear what it's going to say. They're going to go and pre-order your book, which is due out in May 2024.
Yes, please.
It's called Rewire, your neuro toolkit for everyday life. Break the cycle, alter your thoughts, and create lasting change. Is there anything specifically you'd like to share about the book that I haven't asked?
No, I think, there was kind of going on a little trajectory of like, I've got a chapter called Creeping Normality. Um, and it's this notion that when things happen on a very sort of subtle basis, like seemingly innocuous, they never reach a threshold to flag them as something wrong.
Hmm.
So, micro traumas, like maybe the way that someone behaves around you. So you start to change your entire normality according to the new perceived normal. We see that with, all kinds of things, like
Yeah.
the war that's going on at the moment. In the beginning, people talk about it, and then after a while, it just becomes this like normal thing that happens on in the background, and I appreciate my privilege every time I'm able to switch off the news and detach from it. So, um, there are things in our lives that happen that sometimes shift that perspective into something that we necessarily didn't want to happen. And
Yeah.
that's a classic example is like abusive relationships or toxic relationships where they're not kind of like emotionally abusive ones. They're not there enough for you to like really think that there's anything wrong.
Hmm.
So that's just something I wanted to flag because I think it's something we don't talk about enough where
Yeah.
people kind of like there's not enough reason to leave or enough reason to make a change,
Hmm.
but enough to change your your center so
Yeah.
you accept a new normal.
Yeah. Uh, I had a different context, and I think I know what you're saying because when I was on holiday with the family in the summer, at dinner time, all of the children were sat on devices. Not my
Right.
children, but all of the children.
Yeah.
And you just think that's a creeping normal because it's like that's just what people are doing now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you get new parents that do it because I guess the cognitive dissonance is like, oh well, everyone's doing it.
Yeah.
And it's like that creeping normal. Like 10 years ago, that wouldn't have happened.
No, and it would have been weird, right? That's,
Mm,
and I love that, and I might actually use that as an example because I need to try
yeah.
to pull out real life examples. I was on the train the other day, and it was about so we were delayed, so we got in at 2 a.m. into Bristol from London, and we were supposed to get in at 1. Um, and this 13-year-old kid was like listening to his phone really loud as well. I was getting really frustrated because I was like, firstly, it's like it's 2 o'clock in the morning. Why is your kid on his phone in the first place? And secondly, why is it so loud that it's like annoying me? But they've just been come back from the football. But I was thinking about that. I was thinking like how we just normalize these things now. Like that is not normal. And I know the science of it. So I'm like, hell no, that's not normal. I try not to look at my phone after 10 o'clock at all
Yeah.
because this yeah we'll go down a whole different chapter on that, but it's really bad for you, right? So having seen kids and their phones at that time, but I also understand like my sister has a child and I get it. I'm like
Yeah.
you just want to like have a bit of peace for a minute, so you're like it's easier
Well,
put them on the phone.
yeah, yeah, 100%. There's compassion. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know, but I think sometimes once we know better, we have to do better.
Yeah,
And I think,
absolutely.
but that normal, maybe someone's up on their phone late at night. Maybe they're just having the weekly white. This is not an attack on anyone that's got any of these habits. Like I've been there,
Yeah.
but it's like
Yeah.
then you wake up and you just expect this lethargic feeling just to be normal.
Yeah, do you
And
then
it's just like that's
caffeinate?
just the way it is. Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
caffeination. It's like the food that isn't real food anymore.
Yeah.
Like, and that's kind of where I'm going with this system of the world, which it just appears normal because everybody's doing it. And I
Yeah.
interviewed a biohacker, UK's leading biohacker, Tim Gray, and
Yeah.
he said, unfortunately, these days, if the majority of people are doing it, it's probably not good for you.
Yeah, and that kind of like aligns with what we were saying about leaderships, about children not being normal, neurodivergencies. If anything, I encourage you to not be normal
Right.
because a new normal, like for lack of a better term, is fucked.
Right,
You
100%.
know?
But it's hidden in plain sight, and that's the thing.
Yeah,
Sometimes, without being too awakened and morally superior, it is when you start to look at it and you go, "Well, now I know this. I've got to do better." The cognitive dissonance in me
yeah,
says, "Now I know this. I have to either change my behavior or ridicule it."
yeah,
And that's why it feels uncomfortable for people, I imagine, who are
yeah,
courageous
yeah.
because they will be ridiculed rather than other people adopt their behavior.
I like that. And I like that we brought up the creeping normality because I felt this urge to say it, but I didn't quite know where I was going to go with it. And then
Yeah.
you perfectly t tied into how, we now accept these new things that shouldn't be accepted. And then it's funny because then, you become a leader in a place where you feel weird for being different, but actually normal is what we should be aspiring to not be.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that creeping normal has gone, 50, 60 years. The introduction of, you know, processed foods, the
Yeah.
introduction of schools, and
Yeah.
6 hour. It's been a long time. And therefore it's like cooking the frog, isn't it? It's all hidden in plain sight.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
So when someone comes along and goes, "Oh, well, this is bad for you," someone goes, "No, can't be bad for you. There's nothing wrong with that. Like everyone
I
does it."
know. I know. I won't name who because I think it'd be embarrassing if I did, but I know someone in my family who was, I can't remember, but they were kind of like, yeah, but the cafeteria food is even worse.
Yeah,
Something like that. And I was like, yeah, but it doesn't mean that you should be eating junk just because the cafeteria food is worse, you know?
yeah. It's
If you
like
know better, you need to do better.
it's like saying vaping's healthy, or it's
Yeah,
healthier. It's healthier than smoking. It's like that's a dichotomy.
yeah,
That's not a
yeah, yeah,
that's a
yeah,
clever use of words.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. So I think it's, yeah, just trying to check what your normal is
yeah.
and what you want it to be against, what people perceive normal to be. Because I don't think one of things have ever been normal. Probably not, but I like this conversation.
Well, let's continue to rewire, and thank you for all the work that you're doing, putting out into the world. And I have a word here at Always Bitten Yesterday. It's called heartprint, which the word symbolizes the ripple effect, the legacy that we have, the impact that we have on others, the possibilities that we create. I'd wonder if you take a moment to reflect on what you hope your heartprint will be.
I love that you said that because that's how I close off the chapter of my book. It's like now that you have the tools, I think greatness and the purpose of life is to pass these things on to other people through either, directly or through observation. Again, that observational knowledge that we put onto people, showing them, leading them into a different way of thinking. Um, so I think that it's a big, big part of humanity, really, is to help those around us to be better if we know that we can be better as well. So I don't know if that answers your question. What was the question?
Love that. Yeah, just the hope for the legacy that you leave behind and the impact that the book will have on people.
Yeah, I just want people to realize that it's not them, like people are so quick to like blame themselves, like, oh, there's something wrong with me, there's something wrong with my brain, I'm not normal, I can't shift these behaviors. And I want people to be so aligned with themselves. And it goes back to, what I believe is that we need to be aligned with who we are. And then, once you can do that, pass that on to other people, not necessarily by kind of like through not through like kind of like talking down at them. I'm lost
Yeah,
my words, but more like through showing,
yeah.
being the example that I think everyone needs, you know.
Yeah, it comes down to that advice, isn't it? It's not monkey say, monkey do. It's monkey see,
Yeah,
monkey do.
yeah, exactly,
Being a
so
parent, I'm held accountable to that every day.
yeah, and that's so true because observational knowledge is a wonderful thing. They pick up on all your quirks, all your behaviors. They learn how to get to school without you having to explain to them. That's observational knowledge, but they also pick up on the things that you say to yourself, say to your wife, say to them through habits and body language. So it's a very, very interesting subject that I discuss in my book. But yeah,
Love it, love it. I'll put the link to your book, link to your social, link to
amazing.
your website, all in the show notes. And be honoured if you leave us a final thought from your good self.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't know if I have a final thought. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so grateful to be able to sort of spread this knowledge. And yeah, I really appreciate your time, Ryan. So
Oh, I
thank
love
you.
that. Grateful for you, your work, and I look forward to having that conversation in person very soon.
Yes, absolutely. Hope to be one of your first. All
Take care.
right, Ryan, take care.
Thank you for making it to the end of the interview here on YouTube. I hope that our time spent together has left you a little bit better than before you push play. Before you go anywhere, please leave a comment down below, some of your key reflections, your key takeaways. I love hearing from you and what this conversation has inspired in you. Let me know what you're going to do as a result of this conversation. I will be back next Wednesday where I will share another inspiring guest. To make sure that you don't miss that, please do subscribe. hit the bell and you will be notified as soon as it goes live. If you're curious to know how I, through Always Better Than Yesterday, can serve you, your team, your organisation, please do visit alwaysbetterthanyesterday.com, and it will be my honour and privilege to help you in any way I can. Keep leading, my friends. I've been Ryan Hartley, host of the Always Better Than Yesterday podcast here on YouTube. Always love.